My guest today on the Superfluous Fifth String has been described as a teen prodigy, a musical genius, multi-instrumentalist. He's an innovator, a composer, and probably best known for his work with Irish supergroup Solace. So this gives me great pleasure to introduce one of my all-time favorite banjo players, Mr. Seamus Egan, who I know from Solace for many, many years, and I'm a huge fan. And it's a great thrill for me to talk to you because we've never talked about banjo.
We have not. No, I mean, we would cross paths, over the years, but as those kind of path crossings are, they're usually brief, and we never get a chance to have a chat. So yeah, no, this is great to meet like this and
They're
have
usually
a
re-
have a
they're
little
usually
banjo
really
chat.
hot. They're usually really hot, aren't they? It's like we meet in Dublin, Ohio, and it's nobody can talk to anybody because you're just sweating
Exactly,
buckets.
just melting.
Yeah. So do you see? I know you as a banjo player because that's how I was introduced to your music.
Right.
Are you primarily a banjo player or a flute player? Or I know there was accordion, which I never knew about until I googled you earlier today.
Yeah. Oh, really? No,
Yeah.
that must be wrong. There's no accordion. There's
Ah.
never been an accordion.
Well.
But I mean, quite often I find out that I'm also a singer and a fiddle player. So, I wish I wish I was as talented as some of the things out there think that I am. But no, I mean, the flute was the sort of flute and whistle, the first instruments I started with, and banjo then came along shortly after that. I mean, I guess I've been playing the banjo. I started when I was about maybe 7 or 8, I think. And it was really from listening, like hearing Mick Maloney on the radio. And that was really, just pestered my parents to that, I just loved the sound of it. And there was something, I suppose there was something in Mick's playing that sort of kind of, excited my ear to it. And that's, yeah. And then, a banjo, my parents got me a little banjo, and that was it. Sort of
Was
took
that
to it.
were you in Ireland or in the US at that time?
I was in Ireland, in Foxford. That's where we sort of, when my family moved back from Philadelphia in the early 70s. We were in Ballyhaunis for a minute, and then Foxford for the rest of the minutes. So yeah, it was. That's where we started. My sisters and myself started music, and pretty much anything that started learning to play was there in Foxford.
Do you remember what your first banjo was?
I don't think it had a name. I remember what it like. If I saw it walking down the street, I would recognize it like immediately. I don't even know where it is at this point, but it was sort of a reddish brown color, no name, and it sounded incredibly tubby. Like it was sort of like a wash base, like a large wash basin with strings on it. Like there was absolutely no high end to it whatsoever. It was just, bleh. But I loved it, and but shortly after that, okay, I realized that there was no future with me and that banjo, and then my parents found Tom Cousins there in Galway, and he at the time, this is way before he was making his own banjos. But he was getting banjo parts from all over, and then sort of reconstituting banjos, and so so I can't remember exactly how it all came together, but we ended up going down there, and he had sort of put this banjo aside for me, and it was a Slingerland PAL, which was great. I mean, it was So and it had the inlay of mother of toilet seat and all of that, and I loved it. So I still have it. It's actually just there in the behind the curtain. And I mean, I still play it if the banjo I play now, if that has to go into the shop or whatever, and I'm going to be without it for a minute, I still play that one. But yeah, I've only ever had the three banjos in my life. So
That's very curious, isn't it? In one sense, because banjo, for whatever reason, seems to be this real collectible instrument. And you have guys that have 10 and 15. And I saw somebody just recently on Facebook going, I think I've completed my collection. I've just found this, like photographs of 9 banjos lined up on a couch and stuff,
I've always been fascinated by that, but whatever that sort of gene is, I never had, because I was like, well, I can only play one at a time, and if I've chosen to play that one, that's like, it's not it's not an accident that that's the one that I'm playing. Like I like this banjo, and if I got another one that I liked more, then I'd have two banjos that then I wouldn't play the other one, and then I'd start feeling bad because I love the other one, and now I've got this new one that I want to play. So it would just cause me too much angst. So I just sort of the banjo that I have now, I absolutely adore, and I don't have a cause for a new one. I mean, I do occasionally come across a banjo. I'm like, oh, that's a lovely banjo, and I could see myself playing that banjo should I need a banjo, but I don't. I don't need a banjo.
So what is it? What do you play?
Right now, I'm playing, and right now, like as if this just happened, I've been playing this banjo for nearly 20 something years, nearly 25 years. It's I'm looking this way because it's over here. It's Bacon and Day Symphony from the apparently the mid 1920s, which
I love that you don't know.
Yeah,
because only because I'm the very same. For years I had an Epiphone, and an Epiphone recording that I got from Tom Cusson, because the one that I had, he said, it's Genie Max Enda. He said, this is like shouting into a bucket. It was right. Such a similar story, and I would always have said, it's from 1920 something.
Right. Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah.
And then I do start to think, oh, I should pay attention more to this stuff, because then, people come up and they're like very excited about, what you're playing. And then I was like, yeah. And then occasionally so I did learn what this was and a little bit of its history, but I don't, yeah. I mean, it wasn't the reason I ended up with it. I played it and I was like, okay, this suits it feels great to hold. The neck felt really, really good. And the sound was exactly everything that I, would want. So, yeah, I'm really happy with it. I mean, it's, like I said, I've had it for 20 something years now. The neck has been snapped off of it a couple of times from flying, which was very upsetting. But and it's probably now in need of some sizable work, because it doesn't have a truss rod. So, so it's a sort of I guess like a 3-piece neck, which is so it's beginning to warp just a little. So, that's something that needs to get looked at pretty soon.
Now, would you have had it looked at a lot over the years?
Okay, I mean, I was really fortunate when I lived in Philadelphia. I lived across the street from a place called Vintage Instruments. Maybe if anytime you were in the area, maybe you came across it. But it's this amazing place. It's run by this couple, Fred Oster and his wife Catherine Jacobs, and like they look after all the instruments for the Philadelphia Orchestra, and they've got a guitar collection that is just eye-watering. Like they do really high-end sales and repairs. They're very good at repairs. And Catherine has looked after my instruments for years. So I'd come back from from a tour, and literally I would put the suitcase. I could put my suitcase and stuff and the gear in the house, and then walk across the street. I would text her from the airport and say, I'm going to drop, I'm home for a couple of weeks. I'm just going to drop stuff in. And she'd, give it get it back into shape again. So I was, so now I don't have that. It suited it was very suitable to my lazy and sort of planned nature. So I didn't have to think about it too much. Now I have to, it's way more complicated, but yeah, so they're going to build a neck for me. So we'll see. But that'll be the biggest. I mean, aside from Catherine fixing the neck a couple of times, this will be the biggest sort of job on the instrument.
And will the new neck have a truss rod?
I don't believe so. They've been doing this scanning, like 3D scanning of necks. Primarily, they started doing this thing where we're scanning necks for on old Martin guitars, and then building, like, then using these 3D models to build like carbon fiber versions of the neck that they were then Martin would have them, so that if someone came in and needed a neck reconstructed or a new neck, like, from whatever model guitar, they would have this completely exact replica of that neck, which is it's just amazing. So they're going to do that with this banjo, and so they'll scan the neck, and then apparently there's someone, I'm kind of sketchy on the details, but apparently there's someone in Kentucky who is pretty handy at making a new neck based on these on drawings. So that's the idea in a very general sense. So other than that, I don't know what is going to happen. I mean, I probably, I don't know how long it'll take or whatever, but I'm excited to see what happens. Theoretically, it should be as if I'd closed my eyes, I wouldn't know the difference, in terms of how it feels and sounds. So,
wow, that's really
I know.
interesting. Yeah.
I know. It's kind of it's kind of exciting, So, but I honestly, I don't know how far gone it is. I mean, to my ear, it's still like, I don't have tuning problems with it. It all seems pretty good. But when it was with Catherine the last time, she was saying it's going to be something that has to be dealt with pretty soon. So
Yeah.
this might be the time to do something like that, because it's not like we're going anywhere.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's a luthier will see those little micro bends and stuff that I have an Epiphone that I've had since I was 11, and it had never really done anything. I had just been playing it for years, and then
Right.
I had kind of stopped really playing it as my own banjo, and I sent it down to a guy in Kenmare called the String Doctor. So he specializes in doing up old Epiphone banjos.
All right. Wow.
So
That's very niche.
Yeah, he took it apart. Now he'll do like anything, but he loves the Epiphones, And he sent me up the photographs, and he said, I've never had a banjo in worse condition than this
Really?
one. Well, like, what have you done with it? And
Oh.
I reckon if you had analyzed the DNA on the flange, it would have had hundreds of musicians from Miltown Malbay to every Flacchiole for 25 years.
Right. Yeah, I
It
can imagine.
Yeah. But he did a beautiful job and improved it enormously. Because my technical knowledge of what's going on under the hood of a banjo is appallingly bad.
Same as that.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm lucky I can change the strings, and if it gets much past that, I'm just like, anyone, can anyone do something? It's not great.
Yeah. So going right back to when you took up the banjo first off, because I'm I'm a big believer in technique, and it's kind of based on teaching for many, many years. And when you come across the kids or often adults that have played for a long
Yeah.
time, and they're stuck, like, and it's always comes down to having the wrong picking pattern or way too much tension or weird hand placements and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Like, how did you get started? Did you start with a particular method or just pick it up and start playing?
I think it was more picking it up and starting playing, and then kind of getting around to realizing everything that I was doing wrong. And it, when we were in Foxford, the sort of the situation was that we'd have someone would come to town once a week into the town hall and would have classes, right? And so his name was Martin Donahue. He was a box player from Ballandine, and but he played the accordion, uh, and he was a quadriplegic, and so it wasn't, so he could play, which it was amazing. He could play the accordion in such a way, he could hold it in such a way. It's like very limited movement of his arms, but it's kind of it was amazing that he could play, and he was incredibly good at explaining instruments. But it wasn't like you would have someone play that instrument back to you. Like it wasn't like you were sitting in front of someone who was playing the instrument that you were playing. So it was a lot of just kind of based off of you would sort of play something, and it wasn't really sort of like banjo lessons. It was more general sort of music lessons. Um, so when I came, so by the time we moved back to Philadelphia, and then I met Mick Maloney because he was living in Philadelphia, and then he sort of took me under his wing, and and I guess I would have been about maybe 12, 13. And then he started to show me, everything that I was doing wrong. And, then started to, the picking pattern, ornaments, and, just sort of laying that out. And then, I would just, I would spend weekends over at his house, and he would just, he would show me something and then just leave me off to work on it. And it was super informal, but it was the right sort of education, and that at that time for me. But it definitely, like, whatever technique that I developed, it started there, and it was all based on on those lessons,
Hmm.
sort of as informal as they were, you know.
Fascinating. Martin's daughter Bernie started me on the banjo.
Get out, really?
Yeah, yeah. I met Martin.
Wow.
When we were small kids when he was still
Yeah.
alive, because I'd go to Bernie. We drive up once a week. She was teaching music in the school where when I was a kid, like, so I was like
Okay.
8 or 9. She came in, said, "Who wants to play the banjo?" And I was like, "Me."
Wow.
Yeah. She was
That is
an
amazing.
she was an amazing teacher, a brilliant teacher.
She played the concertina, right?
Yeah.
That was sort of like her main thing. I remember, because I mean, yeah, she would have been. Yeah, she would have been a teenager when she would occasionally come be with Martin when he'd come to Foxford, and then we would go quite often. Then we would go down to Ballandine to the centre that he had there, the stable drivers thing. And so yeah, so wow, small
Yeah.
world.
Small
Yeah, it's
world.
amazing.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
How do you match up flute and banjo? I mean, they're terribly unrelated.
yeah. I don't think I do. I mean, I think I growing up, I mean, really, fortunate that if myself or any of my sisters, if any of us showed sort of any interest in an instrument, somehow my parents made it possible for that instrument to find its way into our hands. Um, so yeah, so I think, I mean, when I heard the flute, I think fundamentally I respond to the sound of instruments. So and I would hear things. I say, all right, that to me sounds like something that's a flute thing, and then then I would hear something else, and that, okay, that sounds like a banjo thing. So I kind of keep, in some ways, even something that you should be able to play on the flute, or something that you should play on the banjo. But if I hear them like, oh, that is a banjo thing, or that's a flute thing, that's, yeah, I just kind of split that in my brain, I think, somehow, and things become, okay, that's sort of in the plectrum world, this is in the woodwind world. And then weirdly, I find it very difficult to bring them together, even though I know the tune. Like, playing them feels very, very foreign to move one to the other. I mean, I could play it, but I wouldn't be, particularly, you know, confident in moving one to the other. Like, because if I hear something, it's like, oh, yeah, that would be great on the banjo, or that would be great on the flute.
Is there any instrument that you wish that you learned as well as you learned banjo?
I think, I mean, I don't know. I mean, the banjo was something that I found it much easier to learn, or I don't, I, I found it less of a thing. Like, my memory of learning, say, the flute, like, I remember all the time spent practicing and trying to get the sound, and how it was always sort of, it fought you to, like, it never worked with you. Like, I always found the banjo to be very agreeable. Like, you could pretty much, if you had a banjo to do like that sounded and you liked the sound of it, it felt like we got on, and we didn't really have much of a falling out at any given time. The flute was always sort of a battle. Like, you realized early on that the flute was, you were going to have to really stay on top of it. Like, it wasn't going to cut you any slack, and it was never really going to be your friend. It would tolerate you, but it's not going to be your best friend. That's my relationship with the flute. The banjo always seemed like it was very friendly. Like, and it would be, yeah. So I never, like, playing the banjo always felt like, practicing the banjo always felt fun. Like, it was always like playing, as opposed to playing the flute. Like, was practice, if that makes any sense. So the so yeah, so everything outside of that, like, I enjoy, like, in some ways, the mandolin is something that I have a similar relationship to, like, at the banjo. It's like, it just felt natural, and it doesn't, but, and sometimes I mean, I play the guitar, the nylon guitar, but I don't really I'm not a guitar player, because it's tuned not like a guitar. Like, and it's not a guitar. It looks like a guitar, but there's nothing the way that I have it tuned or do with it that's guitar like. Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I mean, there's certainly instruments that I wish I had studied. I mean, I wish I had studied piano. I think if there was an instrument that I wish that would be the one. I just think it would have helped.
So what do you write music on then? Because you've written for soundtracks and lots of different genres, obviously
Mm.
Irish and many other genres. So what do you write on? You hardly write on the banjo, do you?
No, very rarely on the banjo. I mean, but mostly on my version of guitar, or on piano or keyboard. And I think, yeah, it's either guitar or piano that I would write on, which, I suppose is interesting, since I don't really play either of them. But I think there's something, sort of, I think there's something to be said for sort of like the naivete you can have going into playing an instrument that you're not particularly proficient in. You're not really, you're not encumbered with technique, or can just do this. You're just like, okay, I'm just going to make sounds, and you kind of find your way through it that way. And so yeah, so most of like, when I'm writing, I mean, I write on the mandolin, and more so now in the last little while. But if I'm scoring something or whatever, it's mostly on piano, or the guitar.
And have you learned all the skills then for scoring music? Like,
Well, I mean, I've learned, like, I don't read or write music, so it's all, my learning skills would be learning logic, like, so I can, everything I do, I would just put into logic, and then work with people if something needed to be uh, written out for other people and stuff, just kind of find people who can help with that, facilitate that step in the process. So yeah, so I mean, I realized a long time ago, even though I had a strong desire to learn how to read and write, that it just wasn't was going to happen. It was just and I don't know if I've got, I've had, I have dyslexia, and I've always, and I never really sort of connected the two things. Like, really, like, when I look at a piece of music, it makes absolutely, I cannot make it out. It's a, and so it was years before I was like, wait a second, maybe that's connected to to the problem of reading, like just reading. Um, so, um, so yeah, so most of that stuff after a while, I was just like, this is just torturous, because I had tried to learn. So I would, I just pick up what I pick up as I go along, and then just, apply it to things that I know that I have a chance of learning, which is something like logic, and just applying, or Pro Tools or whatever it might be. I'm saying logic right now because logic is open on the screen. Listening to them, like, it could have been Pro Tools. It was earlier today. But yeah, so yeah, I'll just sort of work. I'll work within my limited skill set and try to make the most of it. Yeah.
So, where did your musical influences come from? Like, outside of Mick Maloney, was there a big Irish community? What were you listening to when you were learning banjo right at the start?
Well, I mean, it, a lot of Mick. I mean, and of course, I mean, it was funny. Like, when I just loved the sound of banjo, and I didn't really. I mean, we didn't have a television growing up as kids, so so everything was the radio or albums, and more radio than albums. So I would hear banjo on the radio, and what I realized, and not knowing it at the time, but I was like, as much as I loved mix playing and the sound of that, I was really drawn to what I learned way many years later to be. I was really drawn to the five-string banjo, to the sound of the five-string banjo, and in my mind, I didn't really make a huge distinction between what they were playing on the five-string banjo and Irish music. It was the banjo. Um, but I didn't realize that it was essentially another instrument. Like, it really, the crossover between bluegrass five-string banjo and Irish tenor banjo, it might as well, be, a tuba and a ladder. I mean, it's like, it's like, but to my ear, I was like, well, it sounds great. And then what I started to try and do was think, well, it's that's the instrument that I'm playing. And then the thing that appealed to me in the sound of the five-string banjo was the sort of lightness of it, and the sort of the smoothness of the picking. But I thought that they were just doing it with the flat pick. But I would sit and just play for hours trying to get my right hand to sound as smooth as the five string, not realizing that was a futile sort of endeavor, but that's what I did. And I think, but I think it probably lent that doing that probably sort of meant, I think I definitely, like, I think I play lighter, and I try and have that sort of lighter sound, or it's definitely, my ear is still drawn to that. Um, but that's why it means the sound. Like, I just thought that they were all playing with the flat pick, and it was all four strings, and it was just they were just doing something way better than I could, and that's what I tried to do.
So did you develop a whole load of kind of cross-picking patterns then with your right hand that are outside of the kind of the Irish canon?
I, I possibly. I mean, I would work something so that I would try and have it to be, you know, uh, to my ear, something that was less sticky. That it would like that flowing of something. So I would just play for hours of just like repeating the same thing over and over and over again to try and get that, like, to smooth it out and just um just yeah, to make it as light as possible. Um and I guess, yeah, I mean, if I did, I mean, I'm sure I must have, because I was able to do it, and it would have been just sort of, I think, just instinctually trying to figure out something that was, I mean, the one thing I did learn and was to, just uh, to be as sort of as relaxed and just to be as basically try to keep the right hand as light as humanly possible. And this this past year now I've been doing a lot more, way more teaching than I have in before. And it's the one thing that I realized that makes it, to if someone is trying to learn the banjo and they're having trouble with sort of getting a sound or getting the thing to sound nice or sound smooth or unsticky, or maybe their ornaments that keep getting tripped up and all that. And the one thing that seems to have a pretty immediate and lasting effect is just relaxing that right hand and just sort of keep it as light as possible. In terms of how it's on the instrument, but also how you're holding the pick. I think there's a lot of tension that that you can sort of bring to the instrument, which doesn't, the banjo just doesn't want to be bashed, even though that's sort of what, it's a loud instrument. But I think the sort of the gentler you can kind of, whatever sort of gentleness you can bring to it, I think it kind of works with you better. So that's the thing that I try and keep reminding myself of, to try and keep it, keep it gentle, and it still gives you a lot of room dynamically for playing, but like, and certainly helps. And the other thing as well is, and I don't know, playing with these sort of, and this is again from the time I was a kid, is the only pick I ever played with, but these Herdem picks, I know you've certainly, you definitely have tried one of these, I know. But yeah, it's like the lightest point on these Herdem picks, that has been since I was a kid. That's what I've always played with. And again, they're super light, Um,
That's so curious. I've tried them. I absolutely detest those picks. Try them, and there's a oh man, I still haven't found the perfect pick. I have one at the moment that I like, but I go through two to three of them each gig, and then check.
really,
Yeah, once the I discovered through our sound engineer, he said if you rub it off a carpet, you can sharpen them up again, and you might get another kind of half a gig out of it. But
really,
yeah, but
wow.
still struggling to find that the perfect pick. But I would have always struggled with those little the pointy ones.
These ones,
Hmm.
yeah, it's funny. Like, I don't know that I've ever met anyone that plays with these. I don't know how they're still in business, because I mean, I'm glad that they are, because like I'm really worried about the day that you can't get them. Because I'm like, it's the only I've tried. Like like I've only recently decided, like in the past year or so, that I didn't like the sound of these on the mandolin, right? So, and even like with the heaviest one, so I started to experiment with heavier, like, picks, and that, like the ubiquitous Jim Dunlop 1 millimeter,
Yeah.
so that's about, I'm trying to get used to that on the mandolin, but I've tried it on the banjo as well. I absolutely loathsome on the banjo for me, and but I'm getting used to it on the man. And then somehow I ended up with one of these sort of fake tortoiseshell picks, right, for the mandolin, and there's no give. It's like playing with a like a rock, like a. I love the sound of it, but it's really, really difficult to play with. Like, it just keeps falling out of my hand because it's so smooth, and it keeps like turning. So, but I'm committed to try and get this to work because the sound of it on the mandolin is great.
Try a Wegan chip, Wegen. It's a white 3-sided pick, and it's got holes in it. I don't have one handy here.
Okay.
Mandolin players use them. They're kind of an alternative to the blue chip picks, but the Wegan is really nice. I have an Irish mandolin here made by Dave Shapiro. He hasn't made a huge amount of them, but it's absolutely beautiful on it. It's not as hard as the blue chip. It still is completely, there's no give whatsoever, but it feels a little bit gentler going over the strings, but it's really nice.
All right, I'll give that a go because I mean, there's nothing will shift me off of the hurdle for the banjo. That's
so when you're playing live, right? Because playing acoustically at home, even playing in a session in the studio, and then you go on stage and it's loud, and you got monitors or you have in-ear monitors, and there's just so much noise, and then big venues and crowd noise. Does your right hand change? Mine gets quite tense, and I usually go up a pick size. I go from a 50 to a 60 to kind of compensate for just that wall of sound that I'm living in.
I think, yeah. I mean, you're definitely I would be digging in a bit more, and then I'll try and remind myself that I shouldn't do that because we had a sound man with us for years who would we would do a gig, and it was like big raucous energy, and and we'd come off afterwards, and he would just give out to us because he was like, why? And particularly me, and it's like you're banging the hell out of that thing. It's like but he was right, because what he was saying was that if you're like the harder and the more you're digging into the instrument's like it's going to close down, right? It's sort of like you have the sort of false sense of pushing the sound out by digging into it, but you're in fact you're closing the sound. And so he was always trying to get us to remember to play like you're playing into it, and you're not you're not giving that energy. But when you're trying to like really there comes a point of diminishing returns if you're like banging the hell out of it. I don't think I ever really accomplished splitting the difference because but what I would do, I would move up to number 2 on the Herdem. So that was my concession too. And if it was this was also temperature related, because if it was really hot, these things turn into water or a liquid really quickly. So if I left this in my back pocket and I would have been sitting down, this thing was basically just like a piece of tissue. And so so you have to keep an eye on that. But I would move up to number 2, and if it was a particularly hellacious gig, maybe number 3, but it would have to be absolutely sweltering.
Oh, that's brilliant.
Yeah. So I as much as possible, I try and keep on the 1, because I feel that if I move past it, I turn into a different kind of a different player for that stretch of time, and sometimes that's what's required. But,
yeah. And did you get really technical then when it came to pickup sound versus condenser mics, preamps, all of that kind of stuff? Did you use in-ear monitors?
We did for a while, and then as a band we couldn't really come to agreement about it. The merits of Inears, and so we moved off of the Inears. I mean, I tried out loads of different sort of setups for the banjo, for pickups, mic, clip-on mics, mic and pickup combinations. And I never really found anything that I liked. And then I sort of just ended up, going with, it's just 57s, 57 in the, and because, yeah, for whatever reason, I mean, it's an ongoing thing. I have been seriously looking at, what is the Grace Design, mixer.
The Elix.
Yes, I mean that is. I think that's the trick, and then that with a clip-on and a pickup. I think it was, a lot of it was just that the blend. I couldn't get anything that sort of blended the two, and then. What are you using?
Well, I met Bela in February at Wintergrass, and I asked him, because he has the Grace Audio, which we have, and they are immensely amazing. And I said, Bela, do you when you were with Flecktones and that, did you use the in-ear monitors? Because I'm really struggling with them, because it's a digital sound in your ear, you have no feel. And he laughed and he said, man, I used to come off stage wanting to kill myself and go, why am I the one person in this entire venue that has a crap sound? I have the worst sound. And so he started, they put mics out into the audience to capture ambient sound and feed that back into the ears so that there was some sense, I'm using a Fishman Rare Earth with the Grace Audio Elix. The sound that's going out to the audience is fantastic. We have an excellent engineer. It wouldn't be as good. My preference would be like a DP20. Is it what those little clip-on condenser mics?
Like the DPAs.
DPAs.
Or
But the problem with those is, because we move around the stage so much, is that you would then have to have a battery pack or a very long cable that you're tripping over. So everything, it's always a trade-off. I'm not 100% happy. I usually end up playing with one of my Inears out because I need that ambient sound. If I can't feel, there's nothing I like more than standing in front of a really loud monitor with lots of banjo in it, because then the banjo reverberates and it feels alive.
Yeah.
And when you take that out and you're playing into like a cavernous outdoor stage or something like that, and everything's gone, I find I struggle with those the most.
Yeah, the Inears are the sort of the practical, they're incredibly practical, and but it really it really, you need to adjust to that new relationship, to what you're hearing and what you're not hearing as well, because that sort of the ambience plays so much part of your experience and what you're responding to, and if that's closed out, or we never, like, we would have various sort of I mean it led to some serious rows, but we eventually were like, all right, we've spent way too much time, way too much money on this, and we cannot agree on it. And so we just bagged it after a certain point. But yeah, and then just obviously you're back at the mercy of monitors and but for us, we were always pretty lucky with the with our sound people who traveled with us, and in terms of, they were very good for the house, but they were also very sort of conscientious about what they were sending back to us on stage, because, as whenever possible, we would have them do house and monitors, just doing it from that position. So and yourself, if you're working with the same person for a long time, they can, that gets to a point where we were able to sort of begin to mitigate that horror show that can be stage sound. but yeah, and I mean the banjo, miking the banjo is still an ongoing process for me. And I do feel that I'm probably going to move to the Felix and some combination of pickup and mic. Just because the one thing that does become a problem, and with that, using just relying on a 57, it's inherently, there's one big problem. Like at some point you cannot get any more level on stage. It's just, you're just going to blow up everything. Yeah. and everyone's going to look at you because they know it can only be you, because you're the one trying to, like, you know, get over a band with a 57 and a banjo. Is idiotic, and I realize that. But so it ends up with me having to play much harder than I prefer, and still, not really knowing what's happening. It's just, I still can't hear. So after all these years, I need to do something about it.
So in terms of solace, like it's a glittering career. I feel that it's like one of the most influential Irish bands, and for me, the fact that there was a banjo front and center was a huge deal. Like it was very inspirational. Like how big did it get? It's a long. There's some huge albums and some incredible collaborations. I'm thinking Bela Fleck on one of them, Rhiannon Giddens, I think, at one stage as well.
Yeah. I mean, we were, I think where the sort of the where and the when of where we started was, there was that sort of the mid 90s, and there was, I think our timing was really, obviously had nothing to do with us, but we sort of caught the crest of a wave, and we were, I had a little bit of, the band started in whatever 95, 96, and I had done the music for this film, The Brothers McMullen, which was getting a bit of attention over here, and it won the Sundance Film Festival and whatnot. So like there was that happening, and then the band. So I was getting a little bit of shine from this film, and then that kind of went into the band, and so there was like, and then the band and then that led to us. I mean, I think really the two things that kicked it off for us was like coming out of that moment with the film. We made the first album, and then we ended up on Prairie Home Companion. I think even before the album came out, and then on and as well as this other radio program, similar, called Mountain Stage. So those two, those two things, in conjunction with the film, even though the band name wasn't associated with the film, but my name was, and then I was associated with the band. So we kind of got out of the gate in an unusual way, with that first album. And so that suddenly we didn't have any notion of doing anything other than that first album. We made the first album, and we didn't even think that we'd be touring it, because we were all sort of involved in other things. And so then that got a lot of attention, and then it was sort of away with it after that. So yeah, it kind of took on its own momentum with no thinking really about it, because it just happened. And then the first couple of albums happened very quickly then in succession. Like suddenly it was like, I think we did an album a year, like the first 3 albums. So and we were on the road constantly, so it was all a bit of a blur, and and got to meet, got to work with Bela, Iris Dement, and those first couple of years Johnny Cunningham produced the first album. So yeah, we were fortunate in where we started, and that it was at a time, I think, when there was a lot of attention on all things Irish in America. And I guess Riverdance was starting right in the mid-90s. So there was this sort of groundswell of sort of mainstream spotlight. I mean, obviously Irish music had always enjoyed a degree of success in America for ages. So it wasn't that wasn't there. It was just that there was a slightly brighter light burning on what we were doing at that time, because it was, I mean, you couldn't turn the television on and there was like every TV commercial had tin whistles or pipes or something. It was ridiculous, and you would be, I mean, I would, if we weren't on the road, I was working on, I was doing I was doing music for TV commercials, playing the whistle. It was absurd, or playing the bodhrán. It was just like, it was a moment of strangeness for sure. But we benefited from that for sure, so
Where is Solace kind of on a quieter spell now? Is it, or
yeah.
what's what are you doing now, and what is your? I mean, have you big dreams? Have you big stuff that you're working on? Have you something that you'd love to do?
Yeah, I mean, right now, I mean, the band decided after we had the 20th, we did the album for the 20th anniversary, and like leading up to that, we were like, we need to take a bit of a breather after that, and so we planned to do that album, and then we would tour that, and then we were going to hit pause, and so that was in the album came out in 15. I think it was like 2017, the beginning of 2017, we wrapped up whatever touring there was for that. And so it's been now we're going into our fourth year of that, not of Solace being on a break. And honestly, I don't know what the future holds for the band. I mean, I imagine at some point something will happen, but there's no plans for anything like that. But I mean, for myself, I mean, I released a new album there at the beginning of last year, and we didn't get really to tour that very much, but we got a couple of weeks out of it, and so I'm doing some I'm, I guess I'm working on a bunch of different things. I mean, one of the things that I've been working on for the last while, and was sort of it's an outgrowth of the Solace, not the last one, there's 2 albums ago, the Shamrock City album, which was a sort of a concept album based on a story from my family's history about a relative who come over and ended up in Butte, Montana, working in the copper mines. And so the band made an album based on that story. But since then, been working with someone who'd been sort of writing a sort of a play about that. That has it kind of right now it sort of keeps vacillating from being a musical into back to a play, and we're not quite sure where it's going to be at the minute, except that I've written a ton of music for it, but now kind of unsure of whether it's an actual musical. But yeah, I'm like, with the new solo album, Early Bright, did hopefully get a chance to I don't know, tour that, probably, who knows. But I'm writing a bunch of new stuff, working on some film stuff, and yeah, it's an interesting sort of, it was sort of after 20 something years of being in a band, and then that stopping, there was a moment of going, whoa, this feels very strange, and a moment of going, well, I'm not quite sure what what that means. So and I think also I sort of benefited from the fact that at the same time I decided to move from Philadelphia, which I'd been in for 20 years. So there was other things to sort of distract that initial transition. But like most things, that was sort of like putting it off. At some point, there was going to be sort of a reckoning of what's next. So that happened up here in the wilderness in Vermont. So it took a while to sort of figure out what was next. But the more sort of distance I got from the end of the band and the move and sort of settling down once again, and kind of getting set up in a workspace again, like built a new studio and all that kind of stuff. And yeah, it's just a lot of writing and excited about this this play, and a couple of other other projects that are sort of starting. Like one of the things with and it's funny, and you might find this as well, because I mean you guys are you guys were tearing it up on the road until we had to stop. But you have all these ideas that you want. It's like, oh, I'd love to do X, Y, and Z, musically, but then you never get to do it because you're doing the stuff with the band. And so the band is a full-time occupation. I mean, even if you're not on the road, you're working on stuff about being on the road, or you're working on the next album, or you're working on whatever. It's nonstop. So, so I had over the years, I had a collection of things, a list that was growing of things that I had wanted to do. And so occasionally they would bleed into the band, but just like a bit of something, there's, oh, okay, I've written this. It was for this other thing, but I'm not going to get to this other thing for quite some time. And then it would find its way somehow. A version of that would find its way to the band. But then once I didn't have that excuse anymore, it was like, oh shit, I actually have to start doing this stuff now. I can't actually just say, oh, I don't have the time. It's like, well, I've got the time. So, but it's an interesting sort of switch from going, oh, I don't have the time. Oh, I've got the time. Oh my God, I've got the time. And then the terror of that, and then you have to kind of readjust again. So that's like, a large part of the last couple of years has been adjusting to that third version. Like, oh my God, I've got the time. And, and then again, compounded more by the sort of where we are, with world events. So.
Indeed. Oh my God, the time. Yeah, I know that one too well.
Yeah.
And I think what happened to a lot of musicians that were touring when COVID hit was that they came home, got over the initial shock, and then there was this enormous pressure to create. It was because it was like oh my God, you've got all of this time now. You must have 15 albums you're going to write by June. And a lot of people got crushed, I believe, under the weight of that kind of self-imposed pressure that this is going to be the most meaningful time I've ever had. And I feel I'm just kind of coming out of a year of very intense pressure to create, particularly online, and just now kind of breathing and going, okay, wow, so there's more time here now because this is going to go on for a little bit more. So what do we really want to do?
Yeah, I think that's so true. I mean, that initial sort of, when literally everything stopped overnight, and then it was like everyone kind of made their way home eventually, and then it was like, oh yeah, we're home. So I didn't have that sort of like initial impulse. Like at the beginning, I was like, I felt somewhat sort of paralyzed, and I was like, well, I'm not, like, I didn't feel like I saw so much stuff being created out there, and I was amazed and really sort of in awe. I was like, wow, this is incredible. Like everyone seemed to be able to turn that very quickly into this was, and now this is. And I was like, and realizing, well, I don't seem to I haven't found that switch just yet, because I was still going, what the fuck just happened? So so it took me a couple of months to sort of, sort of not process it, that's the wrong word, but just sort of find my own way into what I thought that I could, do, and figure what that meant. And so it took me a while to sort of get comfortable in that. I remember doing my first sort of streaming thing, and I was absolutely terrified, and I, I hated it. I hated it so much, and it was sort of because it was just like, oh my god, everything that you have sort of learned to rely on in a performance sort of thing is taken. It's gone. Like someone putting an emoji of clapping hands does not does not give you that thing. Like you're like, oh well, okay, I'm glad. Then it's worse than, I suppose, someone giving you the finger with an emoji, but at least you're like, okay, and it's trying to learn how to respond to that and make that sort of switch in your mind, of like, okay, what is the difference between me sitting in this room, which I've done for hundreds of hours just playing, and now what's the difference between that and what has just happened? Like, where do you make that sort of mental and that jump? Because like the camera pointing at you doesn't make you do, at least it didn't for me. I don't know. So I struggled with that initially, and still do. It feels like a heightened sense of scrutiny or something. Like, I think when you're doing a show, you're like, okay, whatever happens, you're in the moment. You're having this dialogue with the people who are there. So you're all experiencing this in a very in the same way. They're responding to this environment. You're responding to their response. So it's like this thing that happens, and there's a safety in that, and the energy of that. But when you're doing that in your studio or wherever you are, and that's going out to someone who's like, maybe they're making a cup of tea or making dinner, and there's kids screaming, like their relationship now is totally different to what well, your relationship is different. Their relationship to how they're taking it is very different. So it's very, very hard to know, like how do you how do you how do you go across that bridge to, and what's the expectation? And because it's also very different. And I just kind of felt like, I don't have that sense of what's working and what's not, you know. Um, so
Yeah, I ended up doing more interviews with other musicians because the thoughts of playing banjo on my own in a room into a camera on a and just at that stage just the mic on the laptop was soul destroying.
yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
yeah.
Yeah, it's I started teaching a lot more, and again, there was a learning curve on that, and but then I started to hold these sort of group classes, which I started to enjoy. Like that the relationship then was somewhat more immediate. Like you're working with people, and they're like there's a common purpose, like that you're all sharing in, even though it is virtual. So that was sort of, and having, and then having some guests on and stuff like that. It was I've enjoyed that, because those types of things you couldn't do easily before, and so that's been a surprising. I was surprised at myself how much I enjoyed it, um, and also, and particularly in the difference that it was in when you're trying to do, you know, sitting with the banjo just by yourself and a camera, which I agree is a hateful thing. Like, I think for everyone involved.
Especially when you play the first part of one tune and the second part of another tune, and then you're completely lost.
Yeah, it's just like, oh yeah, it's But it again, the one thing though that's encouraging is that we all sort of adapt and develop. I think we're all sort of now finding, or at least speaking for myself, finding the things that I am comfortable with, and knowing or getting an idea of how I can get comfortable with some other aspects of it, and sort of adjusting what's available to what kind of suits your particular needs, and knowing what is best left to others. maybe more importantly.
Yeah. Yeah, I think when we do get back out on the road, what my hope is that I'll appreciate it an awful lot more for what it is.
Yeah, yeah, I think so. I mean, I can't imagine being able to go back out again and have the same sort of mindset that existed beforehand. Before. Um, it'll be really interesting. I mean, the few times that we ventured out, I mean, not for a live thing, but for like a filmed thing or a recording thing, even getting out the door was sort of a strange experience. It was just like, all the things that you've taken for granted, like you realize that for years you've never fully unpacked, for instance. Like your stuff is more or less, it's almost like you're always prepared for an emergency, like an emergency gate. Like you know where the stuff is. It's just like, okay, I gotta go run, and
Yeah.
you know where the banjo is, you know where the leads are, you know where all the gear is, and you just and I remember the first time I had to do something that brought, like, it wasn't a live thing, it was a studio thing, and I had to bring stuff, and it was a nightmare. Like, I didn't know where anything was, and it was just like, "Oh, wait, I've done this before. I've done this my entire life, and this feels like the first time I've." And it was just a very, very strange experience, and I was grateful to have the opportunity to get out, but I was like, "God Almighty, this is stressy."
Yeah. Yeah. My wife made
So
me. She made me put my suitcase in the attic. It was the first time in what 10 or 15 years that it had, physically gone into the attic. And I remember putting it up there, and I kind of had tears in my eyes because I was like, I have no idea when this is coming down again.
yeah,
This is the first time in like 20 years that I had no clue when I was getting on a plane again or when I was going to pack clothes and put stuff. Yeah, I had no idea where.
yeah,
I had to buy a new tuner, clip-on tuner, because I mean I'm only in my house and I lost it because it wasn't in my
I know.
case.
Well, it's funny, like we say, I couldn't find my suitcase when I had to go. I'd done the same thing. I put it someplace and it was out of sight, and which is first time in forever. And I couldn't find it. I didn't know where I'd left it. It was here, and I eventually found it, but I had to ransack the place. And I was like, this is so strange,
Yeah,
so
yeah,
strange. But it's again, it's sort of, I think once you sort of make the mental switch and say, okay, we're settling into this now for a while, and at some point I think I had sort of, I don't know, I sort of had resolved myself to, I think at some point I'd sort of resolved myself to sort of like a 2-year window that this is probably, and I hope, well, we're moving into our second year now, but I mean that sort of thing. So I think sort of fit my generally pessimistic nature anyway. But I was hoping that I was to be wrong. But I think so far it's offered me some cold comfort. So I've sort of gone, okay, we need to just think about things differently, and sort of not sort of pine for what was, and what could have been, and just sort of move forward in what we have, and how, and obviously in the hopes that we come out on the other side of this, and that we do have an opportunity to play again. I mean, it's one thing to sort of have the hope of what's on the other side of this, but also the reality of there's probably going to be fewer venues out there, that it's hard to imagine that the sort of, that the scene is going to be like we left it. I think I think the reality of getting back out there is, I don't think we have a sense of what that's going to be like yet. And and in some ways, I think whatever it is, I think it's going to be, at least for the very near future, some combination of this. end that. And and maybe that's not a bad thing. I mean, I think there's there could be the sort of the reach of this. I mean, the chances are, if nothing else was happening, the chances of us talking like this probably doesn't exist, or without a whole bunch of complications. So that's a positive. And so if there's a scenario in reality which takes the best of this sort of isolated version of ourselves, that can put it to the more sort of extroverted versions of ourselves, well, maybe that's a positive way moving forward. So we can only hope.
Yeah. Well, on that,
we've a ways to go.
we do. And on that positive and hopeful note, Seamus, thank you so much for taking the time to chat with me, and I do look forward to seeing you on the road again, and hopefully sooner
Same as
rather
that.
than later.
Same as that. Yeah. And hopefully we can get out there, and it's going to be, I think it's going to be, it'll be exciting once everyone feels safe again. And
I'm as soon as we meet up, I'm going to try that pick, and I know I'm not going to like it.
But you know what? Maybe I'll just send you some in the meantime.
No, I know.
That's what I should do.
I know where to get them.
You just ignore them.
Yes.
But maybe that they've improved since the last time you.
Well,
you're not alone in your sentiment.
In my new attitude of openness and positivity, I am completely open to them being much better than they used to be.
Well, now here's something that I learned, and I don't know, someone told me this recently, and it blew my mind, because if it is true, I've spent my entire life not knowing this about these picks. So they're red, and there's a blue one here, and they're yellow, right? Now, they're all the same, 1, 2, 3. But apparently, the different colors are different strengths. I don't know this, and I'm holding these, and I'm going, well, I don't know. I don't think that they are, but now it has me thinking, and
it feels a little bit like that scene from The Matrix. Take the
I
red
know.
pick or the blue pick.
I know. So that's that carves out a few hours out of the day for me, like in lockdown. I just sit here, which one?